Dan would have been here at Beyond Belief 1 last year, but had a small emergency, but did send us something from his hospital bed, which was great. And Paul Churchland did a very good imitation of Dan Dennett when he read the message. So Dan almost needs no introduction. Are you still professing at Tufts, or have you just? Yeah. So he's still professing at Tufts and is the co-director of the Center for Cognitive Studies there. But you probably know mostly his books. The most recent one of which was Breaking the Spell. So Dan Dennett.
So I will try to be brief. I did prepare a little PowerPoint. This is not as formal as it seems. These are notes for me and for everybody. Last year, when I wasn't here, there was a fair amount of discussion along the general theme as I too am an atheist, but where my friend Richard Dawkins has picked up on this and has issued a variety of responses and rebuttals to this theme. I'm going to continue that in a slightly different direction. What we've heard a lot of in the last year is that the books by the notorious Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Dawkins, Harris, Hitchens, and we're abrasive, they're insulting, they're offensive, and that this is a bad thing. And I want to look at this claim, but in a slightly different way. First, let me draw attention to it was an interesting review by Rich Sosis, who's one of the leading researchers, empirical researchers on religion. And in his review of my book, he said it may do more harm than good. And the reason he gave was interesting. He said, because religious people who read it will now look on us, that is, researchers on religion, with even greater distrust than they did before, because they will find the tone of my book insulting and my arguments unnecessarily belittling. My response to that is that, in fact, I think the reason, or one of the reasons, that many religious informants are already suspicious of anthropologists and the like, is that they don't trust the sort of insincerity of the current diplomacy with which those anthropologists interact with them, and a little more candor might actually be just fine. There's a time for buttoning your lip. There's also a time for being a little bit more candid. And this, of course, is a judgment call, and I want to look at that. That was by the way, his review in Free Inquiry. Okay, I've just said this. The distrust of researchers by religious informants may well be due in large measure to their recognition of the insincerity of the respect they are paid. Insincerity is playing, I think, a big role here. A little aphorism. If you have to lie to get your data, that's not science, that's espionage. Now, I'm all for espionage. I think espionage has a big role to play in the world. I'm not opposed to espionage. I just think you should know the difference and know whether you're doing espionage or whether you're doing science. So it's this murky territory between diplomacy and dishonesty that I want to try to shed a little light on. Now let's see if I can do that. Yeah. Dawkins is impolite. Hitchens is impolite. Harris is impolite. I'm impolite. Yes. There's no polite way to say, with all due respect, sir, have you considered the possibility that you have blighted your whole life with a fantasy and are polluting the minds of defenseless children with dangerous nonsense? There's just no polite way of saying that. But what if it's true? Should you just button your lip and not say anything? That's the question. Should we break the spell? That's the meaning of the title of my book. It's breaking this spell about the taboo against speaking candidly about religion and doing the research as openly and candidly as possible. That's what I was writing about. Now, there are distinct grounds, quite distinct grounds, for saying no. One of them, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, is don't break the spell because religion is a good and irreplaceable thing. It's fragile, it's valuable, don't be a vandal, don't muck with something that we need. That's one reason. Entirely distinct from that, or it ought to be, I think in the minds of many people it isn't, is no, because although religion is not so good, pointing this out is either too cruel or too dangerous. I think a lot of people believe the second, but out of diplomacy, put it in the language of the first of these. And I think these are arguable positions, and that we should consider them very carefully. Now, why do some people think that it's a good thing? Well, I want you a little thought experiment here. I want you to imagine a war between the gold army and the silver army. Now let me tell you about these two armies. Both are well equipped and well trained. Now my question for you is, which army do you want to have on your side? The gold soldiers believe that God is on their side, that God will answer their prayers, that if they die, they will go to heaven and be rewarded by God. That's the gold army. The silver soldiers are well-informed and highly trained economists. They're taking out insurance policies, laying off side bets. They're doing cost-benefit analysis, very well-informed cost-benefit analysis. They've got exit strategies, both personal and by group and so forth. Now, which army do you want on your side? There is a very strong tendency, I think, a very powerful sentiment to be explored. This is, thank you, I'll take the gold army because, for one thing, you get a lot more bang for your buck. Quite literally. But you pay a tremendous price, I think, today. Are you willing to pay the hidden cost? And the hidden cost is, in a rather impolite word, dishonesty. Dishonesty. You send those soldiers out there to die for your cause, and they are simply deluded about what the whole thing is. For one, I'm very uncomfortable about that, and would just as soon that we try to muddle through with the army of the economists and just give them enough of a sense of the importance of the purpose for which they're fighting so that maybe they can accept some sacrifice without being deluded. That's what I would like to see. Now, the question we have, a question that's already been nicely raised by Ted this morning, and by the other wonderful speakers. That was really useful and valuable. The historical perspective it gives me and the rest of us, I think, is very useful. And the question is the Enlightenment 2.0, is it a religion? Well, I think we all share a certain, here's credo number one, that the role of reason and scientific thinking should be expanded because it is by far the best set of methods for guiding our actions. That's as close to, I think, a defining credo for us Enlightenment 2.0 types. But our second credo is that science is always skeptical. Scientists always ask, could we be wrong? Always. So, could we be wrong about credo number one? Now, if we were a religion, we would just hoot and scoff and change the subject and maybe kill or banish the person that raised this issue. But in fact, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to look at it seriously. We're going to ask, could we be wrong about number one, about credo number one? Now, many religious people think so. They think there's very strict limits on what the reason and science is good for. Now, David Sloan Wilson sympathizes with them, and I want to thank David for articulating in a way that I haven't seen anybody else do it, the case that can be made for being dubious about credo number one. He does this in his book, Darwin's Cathedral. And it's his distinction between what he calls factual realism and what he calls practical realism. Right, now some quotes. It is true that many religious beliefs are false as literal descriptions of the world, but this merely forces us to recognize two forms of realism: a factual realism based on literal correspondence, that is, in other words, truth, science, reason, etc., and a practical realism based on behavioral adaptedness. He goes on to say, rationality is not the gold standard against which all other forms of thought are to be judged. Adaptation is the gold standard against which rationality must be judged, along with all other forms of thought. And, he goes on to say, it is the person who elevates factual truth above practical truth who must be accused of mental weakness from an evolutionary perspective. And, still further, if there is a trade-off between the two forms of realism, such that our beliefs can become more adaptive only by becoming factually less true, then factual realism will be the loser every time. I want you to think about whether you think that's true. But I'm not myself going to challenge that directly right now. I want to look at this claim that he makes. It appears that factual knowledge is not always sufficient by itself to motivate adaptive behavior. At times, a symbolic belief system that departs from factual reality fares better. Now, that's an empirical claim. And one question we might ask is it true? David doesn't prove that it's true. He offers some reasons for thinking it's true. He may have more to say on that score. Again, I am not going to challenge this empirically at this moment, but I just draw your attention to the fact that this is a very big claim. It's an empirical claim, and we jolly well should find out whether we think it's true or not. Well, what evidence do we have? Well, in my own book, in Breaking the Spell, I quote a passage which I think is very interesting, which in a way previews David's claim. It's from the anthropologist Roy Rappaport. Apologize for the long quote, but I wanted just to lay it out so you can see what he says. In a world, because I think this is the heart of, I think this is what David's on about. In a world where the processes governing its physical elements are in some degree unknown and in an even larger degree unpredictable, empirical knowledge of such processes cannot replace respect for their more or less mysterious integrity. And it may be more adaptive, that is adaptively true, to drape such processes in supernatural veils than to expose them to the misunderstandings that may be encouraged by empirically accurate but incomplete naturalistic understanding. This is, I think, as good as you're going to get as a sort of naturalist's apologia for not just the tolerance of, but the encouragement of non-naturalist couching of claims. That's an interesting question. So, there's David's statement again. At times, a symbolic belief system that departs from factual reality fares better. Now, to put the point bluntly, is this a recommendation that one should lie when it will lead to adaptive behavior? Now, I'm all for espionage. I'm also for lying under certain circumstances. I think sometimes you lie to your kid. You tell a white lie to your kid to get your kid to do something that the kid won't do otherwise, and you succeed, and the kid does what you want to do rather than you don't want to do, and that's good. That's the right thing to do. But don't kid yourself. You lied. You lied. It was a white lie, but it was a lie. Sometimes it's good to lie. It's okay. It does not automatically follow that from something of a lie that it is not a good policy. But one should know what one's doing. The problem is, and this was nicely prefigured by, I guess, by Ted this morning. It's too late. We know too much now. There may have been a time before the Enlightenment 1.0 when political leaders could, with good faith, send armies out into the field with send the gold army out into the field. Because they believed the stuff too. And maybe in that golden age, armies were more effective, they had a greater esprit de corps, they pulled together. An army like that could hold its own against a much larger army of rational individualists. But we can't do that anymore. We know too much. The cat is out of the bag. We can't go back to that. This practical realism that David speaks of is today paternalistic in the extreme and disingenuous in the extreme. It is, in fact, an engine of hypocrisy. It is this feature, this strategic feature that I think creates the burgeoning, ever-ramifying, ever-exploding layers of hypocrisy with which our political lives are now confronted. The fact that in this country, a self-declared atheist could not win office, when we know to a moral certainty that there are atheists in Congress, there are atheists in the Senate. People ask me, when do you think we'll have an atheist president? Ever? I say, oh, we've had atheist presidents, they just haven't admitted it. Practical realism. I don't know how many of you saw this very disturbing piece by Ron Suskind. This is a piece called Faith, Certainty, and the Presidency of George W. Bush. The aide to President Bush said that guys like me were, quote, in what we call the reality-based community, by which he defined as people who believe that solutions emerge from your judicious study of discernible reality. I nodded and murmured something about the Enlightenment principles and empiricism. He cut me off. That's not the way the world really works anymore, he continued. We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again creating other new realities which you can study too, and that's how things will sort out. We are history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do. Now that, I submit, is the sort of reductio ad absurdum of practical reality if we're not very careful. I want to see how anybody can put the brakes on practical reality and prevent this abomination from occurring again. So David knows this. And in his later book, Darwinism for Everyone, he presents what he calls his dilemma. He does this, maybe you'll talk about this more, but I'll give you a little head start here. Quoting and misquoting on purpose a song of Ray Charles, he distinguishes two dimensions, vertical and horizontal. The vertical dimension, is there anyone up there? Does God exist? And the horizontal dimension, is there anyone out there? That's what gives you community and solidarity and that wonderful teamwork that religions make possible. And what he believes is that you can't have the horizontal success without the vertical element. That religion answers yes to the horizontal question by means of answering yes to the vertical question. A factual, empirical claim that he's reluctant to accept, because what he would really like to have is a religion with no vertical element to it. Sheer horizontal solidarity without the supernatural gobbledygook on top. His ideal is a religion that gets the practical realism, the horizontal, at no cost of factual realism, but he doesn't know if that's possible. Well, I don't know either, but I have a practical proposal for how we can maybe start to find out. First of all, I want to address the cruelty and danger problems. we'll leave the grown-ups alone as best we can. If we are too confrontational with them, we may indeed make the world a lot worse. They have a huge emotional stake in the positions they've adopted, and we tamper with that at our peril and at theirs. And instead, we want to concentrate on their children. The strategy is very obvious and simple. The first thing you do when you've got plumbing flooding the house is you turn the water off. You stop creating more people with the problems that you can't solve directly. It's a slow, pragmatic, gentle, practical method, and this is what I want to propose. This is in my book. We have compulsory education in the world religions for all children, in public and private school, and for homeschoolers. In other words, we have the 3 R's now, we add a 4th R. We have this national compulsory curriculum. Notice this is an Enlightenment idea. This is saying, get facts out there, get knowledge out there, just spread knowledge out there, and that in itself will do a wonderful job of the bright light of knowledge will disinfect a lot of things. So what? Not anything about the creeds except what the creeds are, not saying they're true or false, but about the history of those religions, about their creeds, about their rituals, their music, their symbols, their ethical commands and prohibitions. Just plain facts. No spin, no value judgment. These are attested facts about religion. And you just gradually teach children all of these facts. If you do that, then, I say, as long as you teach them this, you may teach your children whatever else you want, as long as it doesn't directly incapacitate them for further learning, disable them through hatred. In other words, what I'm saying is, you teach this curriculum, and if you want to teach them also that the curriculum is the work of the devil and it's all just trash, go right ahead. But the kids are going to be tested on it anyway. I'm quite content that this be taught terribly by people who don't believe in it, but it's going to be taught. These kids are simply going to be exposed to the fact that other people have these other beliefs, and moreover, that their own religion has a history that maybe their own religion is keeping from them. Why? Because toxic religions, and every major and minor religion, as far as practically, has its toxic forms. They all, as far as I can tell, depend on the enforced ignorance of the young. They all depend on it. So a religion that can flourish in a world of mutual knowledge of the facts about world religions is going to be a benign religion. It's going to be the sort of religion that David wants. It's going to be horizontally powerful without the supernatural, irrational, irrational, anti-rational side. Can there be such a religion? I think maybe there can. I think there already are some fine examples of that. And I think probably David and I would agree about those. We can preserve the principle of freedom of religion. Don't tamper with that at all. That's a nice Enlightenment principle. And we can educate the world's children so that they will not be victimized by their parents' religions. Parents don't own their children. Children are not slaves. Parents don't have the right. We would intervene in a minute if we found parents who thought they had the right to keep their children blindfolded or their ears plugged up for 5 years. We're just talking about facts that are known, uncontroversial facts about the world's religions, which I would like to see children know. I think they're just as important as arithmetic and geography and American history and so forth. Now, who could object to this? Some hands are going up. Well, you're not alone. Tom Nagel objects to this. In a recent posting on Gloria Origi's website, Interdiscipline, He says, there's a strong case for avoiding, if possible, a struggle over which religious or anti-religious Weltanschauung will get to use the power of the state to impose itself on the population. Blocking that struggle by keeping religion private is the first line of defense against theocratic pressures, even if it means refusing to extend the state's full protection of individual freedom to children inside the family. In other words, he is prepared to write off the children in order to preserve this, in order to prevent this, this dangerous discussion of what the state can impose. I am all for carefully, openly proceeding with that discussion, because I think if we follow Tom's path, the situation isn't going to get better, it's only going to get worse. We've got to turn off the tap as soon as we can. We would like to be able to say to the Islamic world, please educate your boys and girls in a curriculum other than the curriculum that they are getting in the madrasas. But if we're not educating our own children with a curriculum like this, where do we stand? I think clean up our own house first, then we can start cleaning up other people's. Nagel's response to this is fascinating. He says, Dennett's proposal for a mandatory national curriculum on religious education seems to me precisely the kind of escalation to avoid. It's not escalation. The British have had a system like this, not perfect, in the UK that's been going for years. And the children come home and they tell their parents, oh, guess what we learned today about Hinduism, and we learned about Ganesh, and we learned about Allah, and we learned about this, and we learned about that. And these kids grow up with a matter-of-fact knowledge about world religions, which I think is very healthy. Thank you for your attention from the bottom of my heart.
So, Dan, thank you. Should we go straight to David Summers? You're right about the English system, as the Brits in this room will know, actually. We did all grow up with RI, religious instruction. And what you may not remember is that the person who actually helped institute that a long time ago was Thomas Henry Huxley. Yes, it was Huxley when he was...